Wind carried the dust of the hill country that morning, and the road from Baale Judah filled with voices. Men tightened leather straps, singers tested their throats, and oxen shook their heavy heads as if they understood the weight behind them. After years of war and wandering, the Ark of God was coming up to David's new city. They had won it back by courage and by favor, and now they meant to give it a procession worthy of a king. Uzzah walked beside the cart, close enough to touch its plank, close enough to hear the lowing of the team and the murmur that rose like wind in a grove. He was a son of Abinadab, raised under the shadow of the ark when it rested in his father's house. The shape of it lived in his memory, wood wrapped in pure gold, rings at the corners for poles, the mercy seat guarded by sculpted wings, the hollow that meant presence. He had learned to step lightly near it, to speak softly, to keep a clean heart and careful hands. Yet time, which dulls every sharp edge, had made the holy seem ordinary. Uzzah had seen other processions, the hall of cedar, the return of warriors with dust on their beards, the slow wheels of a harvest wagon, but this one rattled his bones. David himself danced ahead, in a linen ephod that hid none of his joy, leaping like a shepherd under a wide sky. Musicians beat frame drums and struck bronze. Priests arranged themselves with the solemn look of men who remembered Sinai's thunder. The cart, new-built, rode on a path rutted by years of travel. 2 oxen strained on the yoke. Ahio, Uzzah's brother, walked in front with a hand lifted as if to part the crowd. They knew the law, how long ago had it been read to them, that the ark should travel on the shoulders of Levites, with poles, not on wheels. But the Philistines had once sent it back on a cart, and the sight of that unguided wagon had lodged itself in the people's stories. New carts were clean, expedient, proud to the eye. Behind convenience waits forgetfulness. Behind forgetfulness, danger. Still, the crowd did not think of danger. They thought of a nation finally gathered, of a king who had made the tribes one, of a God who had promised a name and a house. Outside the threshing floor of Nacon, the road pitched downward, a spill of stones cut by many feet. The right wheel dipped into a hollow and the cart lurched. Uzzah saw the gold-covered ark sway, only a hand's breadth, but enough to tilt his breath. He did not pray. He acted. His palm rose the way a father's rises when a toddler stumbles, reflex ahead of thought. He set his flesh against the ark to steady what should never fall. The strike of judgment came with no warning. The text said, God's anger burned, but to those nearest it felt like the air itself tightened and tore. Uzzah stiffened and dropped where he stood, breath cut, eyes startled open as if searching for a word that would not come. The tambourine in the nearest hand did not sound again. David stumbled backward. The oxen stamped. The crowd pressed away from the cart as from a cliff edge, understanding nothing except that holiness had returned with a heat no one could bear. They named the place Perez Uzzah, the breach of Uzzah, because a breach had opened between impulse and command, between human reflex and the boundary God had drawn. David's joy broke like a jar. He had wanted God near his city, near his throne, and suddenly he feared the very nearness he had prayed for. "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" he said, hands empty, clothes wet with sweat, heart taken apart. He refused to bring it any farther and turned the procession aside to the house of Obed-Edom, a Levite. Let blessing or disaster fall there first. Let time cool this shock. Let someone else stand near the fire and see if it consumes. In Obed-Edom's house, the ark sat in quiet, and the quiet filled every room with the promise of bread. Fields prospered. Children slept and woke laughing. Neighbors leaned on the fence and nodded, saying the thing nobody admitted aloud: the ark blessed where it rested. Word reached David in the thin blue of a morning smoke. The king heard and felt both relief and resolve. This time, he said, "We will carry it as commanded." Priests washed. Levites prepared poles. Sacrifices were readied, the blood cost that teaches reverence when memory grows thin. After 6 steps, the bearers stopped, and an ox fell to the knife. David danced again, harder, body unashamed before heaven. Michal watched from a window, her face like a shut door, and despised him as a man who forgets dignity. But the city's joy returned, tempered now by the fear that had made its bed between 2 beats of a drum. All the while Uzzah's name remained. Those who had loved him could not file the memory away like a broken tool. They spoke of his faithfulness, his years guarding the ark at his father's house, the steadiness of his hand at other times. They also spoke in tones that bent low of the law, how the ark was not to be touched, how holiness does not topple, how God does not require rescue from human clumsiness. Even compassion cannot edit command. To steady what God had ordered set apart was to deny with the skin what the soul had been taught. Was the punishment too hard? The question lives because the wound lives. But the story gave Israel a grammar for fear and love to dwell in the same sentence. God was not the idol of convenience who rides wherever carts can roll. God was the fire at Sinai and the mercy above the wings, and the distance between those truths could not be measured by a man's reach. In a world where kings were tempted to fold holiness into policy, Uzzah's death warned David that the presence he desired could not be harnessed to the wheels of his success. Later, when the ark came into Jerusalem with sacrifices and shouting, cakes of bread and raisins were handed into every open palm. David blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and the city tasted abundance. But the bearers' shoulders ached that night, and some of them, before sleep, lifted an arm and felt a tender bruise where the poles had rested. They gave thanks for pain that taught them the weight of what they carried. Once a cart had seemed easier, now the easier way shone like a trap. They remembered Uzzah without scorn. They grieved the man whose reflex touched mystery, and they guarded their own reflexes like knives. Uzzah's mother, no text records her name, might have sat in a dark room, smoothing a fold in her robe, asking why a son who honored God should fall in an instant. Grief, which believes nothing and believes everything, must have traveled through her like winter. Perhaps a priest came and sat in silence, the only honest liturgy for such a house. Perhaps he read the law, not as a weapon, but as a map, and left when words were finished. If she heard blessing later on Obed-Edom's fields, she may have tasted it like salt. To the end of her days, the feast day and the funeral day would live side by side. So the ark took its place, not on a cart, but behind a veil, dwelling as a mercy that could not be managed. David learned to ask not simply for nearness, but for purity. He learned that to lead a people into worship is to teach them how to approach without assuming. The poles remained, a practical theology in wood and gold. Every generation after felt the line Uzzah crossed and found it still bright in the dust. Some read the story and bristled, some read and bowed. The story did not bend to either posture. It set a boundary and left it there, shining like a sword that guards a garden gate. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.